Morning Earth received its first official interstellar communication. Maria Santos was feeding her chickens behind the small farmhouse that had belonged to her grandmother. The sky crackled with an odd purple hue, and every electronic device on the planet simultaneously displayed the same message in perfect, locally appropriate languages. For Maria, the words appeared in Spanish across her ancient radio. Primitive species of Sol 3. You have been deemed a threat to galactic stability. Prepare for immediate subjugation. But Maria didn't panic. Instead, she smiled. The same knowing smile that had been passed down through generations of Santos women. The same smile her great-grandmother had worn when the soldiers came to their village in 1943, thinking they understood what they were dealing with. 3 star systems away, Admiral Vex High of the Galactic Coalition's 5th Fleet was reviewing the intelligence reports on humanity with growing confidence. The species was young, barely out of their atomic age. They had primitive space travel, crude weapons, and most importantly, they were divided. The reports showed endless conflicts, humans fighting humans over resources, ideology, territory, even the color of their skin. It would be a simple matter to exploit these divisions. Fragmented, emotional and technologically inferior, Vex High's tactical advisor, a crystalline being called Jector, reported with what passed for satisfaction among his kind. Their largest military vessels are laughably small. Their most powerful weapons would barely scratch our shields. The psychological profile suggests they will surrender within days once they realize the futility of resistance. What the Coalition's xenobiologists had failed to understand, what their advanced sensors and cultural analysis algorithms had completely missed, was that humanity's greatest weakness was also its greatest strength. Yes, humans were divided. Yes, they fought endlessly among themselves. But there was something else, something that didn't show up in their careful measurements of technological advancement or social cohesion. Humans had been preparing for this moment their entire existence, even though they didn't know it. Every human child grew up with stories of unlikely heroes facing impossible odds. Every culture had myths of the small defeating the large, the weak overcoming the strong, David and Goliath, the tortoise and the hare, every underdog sports movie ever made. Humanity had been practicing the art of defiant optimism for millennia. When President Chen received the emergency briefing from her science advisors about the incoming alien fleet, estimated arrival in 72 hours, she didn't call for an emergency session of the United Nations. She didn't mobilize the world's armies. Instead, she made a single phone call to Dr. Eleanor Vasquez at the Canberra Deep Space Communication Complex. "Eleanor," she said, her voice carrying that same strange calm that seemed to be settling over humans worldwide. "Patch me through to whoever sent us that delightful little message." Dr. Vasquez, a woman who had spent her career listening to the silence between stars, hoping for just this kind of contact, felt her hands steady as she worked. The irony wasn't lost on her. Humanity's first conversation with an alien species, and it was essentially a declaration of war. The communication array hummed to life, and within minutes President Chen's face was being transmitted across the void to Admiral Vex High's command ship. When the connection stabilized, the Admiral found himself looking at a middle-aged human woman with graying hair and eyes that sparkled with something he couldn't quite identify. "Greetings," President Chen said in English, the words automatically translated by both sides' systems. "I'm President Chen of Earth. I understand you've declared war on us. That's actually perfect timing." Admiral Vex High's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of confusion among his species. "You misunderstand your situation, Primitive. We offer you the opportunity to surrender with dignity. Your species will be preserved as a client state under coalition protection." President Chen's smile widened. It was the same smile Maria Santos had worn while feeding her chickens, the same smile that had appeared on faces across every continent when the message first arrived. "Oh, I understand perfectly. You've decided we're a threat that needs to be, what was the word? Subjugated. And you're bringing your fleet to do it? The largest fleet in coalition history, Vex-High replied, his voice carrying what he intended as intimidation. 47 dreadnoughts, each capable of cracking your planet's crust, 300 support vessels, over 2 million warriors from 17 different species, all veterans of successful pacification campaigns. Fascinating, President Chen said, and her smile somehow managed to grow even brighter. And when exactly should we expect you? The Admiral's confusion deepened. In his experience, primitive species either groveled for mercy or flew into ineffective rage when faced with overwhelming force. This amusement was unprecedented. 71 hours, 23 minutes, he answered automatically. Piet. Perfect, President Chen said. That gives us just enough time to get ready. Tell me, Admiral, in all your successful pacification campaigns, have you ever encountered a species that actually thanked you for declaring war on them? Before Vex-High could respond, something unprecedented happened across Earth. Every smartphone, every television, every communication device on the planet simultaneously displayed the same image, Admiral Vex-High's face, along with his exact words about the 47 dreadnoughts and 2 million warriors. But beneath his image, scrolling in every human language, was a single line of text that made no sense to the alien observers monitoring Earth's communications. Finally, game on. In living rooms and coffee shops, in military bases and research facilities, in the depths of CERN and the heights of the International Space Station, humans everywhere were having the same reaction. They were smiling. Not the desperate smile of the condemned or the manic grin of the insane, but the satisfied smile of a chess player who had just realized their opponent had walked directly into a trap that had been 50,000 years in the making. Dr. James Mitchell, the world's leading expert on theoretical physics and human nature, sat in his cramped office at MIT, surrounded by equations that most of his colleagues insisted were impossible. For 40 years, he had been working on what he privately called the problem, the curious fact that human innovation seemed to accelerate exponentially when faced with impossible challenges. Wars produced technological leaps that decades of peacetime research couldn't match. Natural disasters sparked innovations in architecture and engineering. Economic collapses led to entirely new financial systems. It was as if humanity was a species that literally could not function at its full potential unless it was facing extinction. Now, staring at the alien admiral's face on his computer screen, Dr. Mitchell finally understood what he had been calculating all these years. Humanity wasn't a young species stumbling toward maturity. They were a weapon that had been forging itself in the fire of endless conflict, preparing for a war they didn't even know was coming. His phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he had never seen before, but somehow he knew who it would be. Dr. Mitchell? The voice was crisp, military, but with an undertone of barely contained excitement. This is General Harrison. I understand you've been working on some interesting theories about human adaptive potential under extreme stress. General, Dr. Mitchell replied, his own voice steady despite the magnitude of what was happening. I think you're going to find my theories are about to become very, very practical. Around the world, similar conversations were taking place. Engineers who had spent their careers dreaming of impossible projects suddenly found unlimited funding and resources at their disposal. Scientists whose radical theories had been dismissed by peer review were getting personal calls from government officials who wanted to know how quickly their insane ideas could be implemented. In a basement laboratory in Tokyo, Dr. Yuki Tanaka looked at the quantum field manipulator she had been tinkering with for 15 years, a device that theoretically could fold space-time but had never worked for more than a few seconds without catastrophic failure. Her funding had been cut 3 times. Her colleagues thought she was chasing fantasies. Her phone buzzed with a text message from a number she didn't recognize. Dr. Tanaka, the Japanese government is prepared to offer you unlimited resources to make your space folding device operational within 48 hours. Interested? She looked at her device, then at the ale. Iron Fleet's trajectory displayed on her computer screen and felt that strange human smile spreading across her face. "Hi," she whispered to her empty lab. "Let's see what impossible looks like." The coalition had made one critical error in their assessment of humanity. They had measured human technology at its peacetime baseline. They had observed human behavior during normal circumstances. They had calculated human military capability based on the weapons designed to fight other humans. They had no idea what humans were capable of when the gloves came off. Admiral Vex High, settling into his command chair for the journey to Sol system, felt the comfortable satisfaction of a predator approaching helpless prey. In 70 hours, the primitive species of the third planet would learn their place in the galactic order. He had no way of knowing that in those same 70 hours, humanity was about to compress several centuries of technological and social evolution into a single, terrifying burst of innovation. The war had been declared. And Earth was finally ready to play. 68 hours remained. Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to the president, despite sharing a surname, stood in what had been the Large Hadron Collider's control room 12 hours ago. Now it looked like something from a fever dream of mad science. Cables snaked across the floor in impossible tangles, connecting devices that had no business existing in the same room. A quantum computer hummed next to what appeared to be a modified microwave oven, which was somehow interfaced with a machine that looked suspiciously like it had been built from salvaged satellite parts and wishful thinking. "Status report," she called out, her voice carrying the exhausted energy of someone who had consumed nothing but coffee and determination for the past day. "The impossible is running about 30% ahead of schedule," replied Dr. Klaus Weber, the German theoretical physicist who had been considered a crackpot until approximately 13 hours ago, when his ridiculous theories about weaponizing gravity waves suddenly became humanity's best hope for survival. His wild grey hair stuck out at angles that defied both physics and grooming products. "Define impossible," Sarah said, though she was smiling as she said it. Klaus gestured at the bizarre collection of equipment surrounding the modified particle accelerator. "We are currently using a device designed to find the Higgs boson to create artificial gravitational anomalies that should, according to everything we knew yesterday, rip apart local spacetime. Instead, they appear to be..." He paused, consulted his tablet, and shook his head in wonder. "They appear to be working exactly as I predicted they would, which is terrifying because my predictions were based on mathematics that I was 90% certain were wrong." Across the facility, similar scenes were playing out in every major research installation on Earth. The Arecibo Observatory, hastily rebuilt using materials that definitely hadn't existed in any supply catalog 72 hours ago, was now broadcasting signals that bent radio waves in ways that made Einstein's theories look like elementary arithmetic. The team at CERN had somehow convinced the Large Hadron Collider to produce particles that their own standard model insisted couldn't exist. At NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Dr. Maria Rodriguez was experiencing what she would later describe as the best, worst day of her career. The spacecraft she was looking at bore absolutely no resemblance to anything that had ever left Earth's atmosphere. It looked like someone had taken a traditional rocket design and fed it through a blender with blueprint. It's from a science fiction movie and the fever dreams of an over-ambitious engineering student. "Explain to me again how this is supposed to work," she said to the young engineer standing beside her. The nameplate on his jacket read T. Nakamura, and he appeared to be approximately 14 years old, though his credentials suggested he was actually 28 and had somehow earned 3 doctoral degrees in the time most people spent learning to drive. "Well," Takeshi said, his voice carrying the particular combination of excitement and terror that comes with realizing your wildest theories might actually work. "Traditional space propulsion relies on Newton's third law. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. You throw mass out the back of your ship really fast, and you go forward." "Right. Rocket science. I'm familiar with the concept." This doesn't do that. He gestured at the sleek, impossible vessel in front of them. Instead, it manipulates local space-time to create what we're calling a gravity surf. Essentially, the ship doesn't move through space, it moves space around itself. Maria stared at the ship, then at Takeshi, then back at the ship. That's impossible. Yes, he agreed cheerfully. It should be, but Dr. Weber's gravity wave theories, combined with Dr. Tanaka's space-folding work and some truly inspired reverse engineering of the alien communication frequency, suggest that space-time is far more flexible than we previously understood. The aliens have been using this principle for interstellar travel. We just figured out how to do it better. Better? Takeshi's grin widened. Their ships appear to surf gravity waves that already exist. This ship creates its own. Meanwhile, in a secure facility beneath the Pentagon, General Harrison was having what he would later describe to his therapist as the conversation that broke my understanding of reality. Across from him sat Dr. Eleanor Vasquez, the radio astronomer who had facilitated humanity's first conversation with the Galactic Coalition, and a woman whose nameplate simply read Dr. Smith, though Harrison strongly suspected that wasn't her real name. "Let me make sure I understand this," Harrison said, reviewing the briefing documents spread across the table. "In the past 64 hours, our species has somehow developed faster-than-light communication, gravity manipulation, space-time folding, and what you're calling quantum coherence weapons, all based on technologies that, as of last week, we were convinced were purely theoretical." "That's correct," Dr. Smith replied in a tone that suggested she was discussing the weather rather than fundamental violations of known physics. "How?" Dr. Vasquez leaned forward, her eyes bright with the particular excitement that comes with discovering that the universe is far stranger and more wonderful than you ever imagined. "General, have you ever wondered why human innovation seems to accelerate during crises?" "I've noticed the pattern," Harrison admitted. "Wars produce technological leaps. Disasters spark innovations. But this," he gestured at the documents, "this isn't innovation. This is magic." "No," Dr. Smith said quietly. "It's evolution." She activated a holographic display that filled the center of the table with what appeared to be a three-dimensional map of human history, but instead of showing geographical changes over time, it tracked something else: innovation, creativity, problem-solving capability. "Look at the pattern," she said. "Every time humanity faces extinction-level challenges, our cognitive abilities don't just improve, they transform." The Black Death led to the Renaissance. World War II produced more technological advancement in 6 years than the previous century combined. The Cold War gave us everything from computers to space travel to the internet. The hologram zoomed in on recent decades, showing acceleration curves that climbed almost vertically. "We've been measuring this wrong," Dr. Smith continued. "We thought crisis drove innovation through necessity, that pressure made us work harder, think faster, collaborate better. But that's not what's happening. Crisis doesn't make us innovate. Crisis makes us evolve." General Harrison felt a chill run down his spine. Evolve how? Cognitively, collectively. When humanity faces genuine existential threats, our brains start working differently. Neural pathways that normally take years to develop suddenly form overnight. Connections between disciplines that seemed impossible become obvious. It's as if our species has an emergency setting that we only access when we're about to die. The hologram shifted, showing brain scans from researchers around the world over the past 72 hours. Every human being working on the impossible projects is showing identical neural activity patterns, Dr. Vasquez added. Patterns we've never seen before. It's like watching our species collectively bootstrap itself to the next level of intelligence. Harrison studied the brain scans, trying to process the implications. "You're saying that humanity is literally evolving in real time?" "We're saying that humanity has always been evolving in real time," Dr. Smith corrected. "We just never had a big enough crisis to see it clearly. The alien declaration of war didn't create this capability, it activated it." 64 Who. Oz remained. In Tokyo, Dr. Yuki Tanaka stood in her laboratory, which now looked like mission control for a project that existed somewhere between cutting-edge science and outright sorcery. Her space-folding device, which had never worked for more than a few seconds, was now running continuously, creating stable micro-wormholes that should have been collapsing into black holes or tearing apart reality itself. Instead, they were working exactly as her mathematics had predicted, which was terrifying because her mathematics had been based on assumptions she was fairly certain were insane. "Status report on the Yamato project," she said into her headset. The voice that responded belonged to Admiral Watanabe of the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, though the ship they were discussing bore no resemblance to anything that had ever sailed on water. "Assembly is proceeding ahead of schedule. The hull is incorporating the space-folding technology exactly as designed. We should have a working prototype within 48 hours. Yuki stared at the readings on her instruments. According to every law of physics she understood, what she was doing should be impossible. According to the results she was getting, it was not only possible but surprisingly straightforward once you abandoned the assumption that space-time was fixed. "Admiral," she said carefully, "I need to ask you something that's going to sound insane. Dr. Tanaka, 12 hours ago I was commanding a traditional naval vessel. Now I'm overseeing construction of a ship that travels by folding space. Insane is our new normal. Have you been having dreams?" There was a long pause. "What kind of dreams?" "Technical dreams. Dreams where you understand concepts that you've never studied, where you see solutions to problems that shouldn't make sense. Dreams that feel more like downloads." Another pause. "Yes, and according to my engineering team, so have they. Every person working on this project is reporting identical phenomena." Yuki nodded, though he couldn't see her. She had been having the same Dr. Eames' technical specifications downloaded directly into her sleeping mind, complete understanding of technologies that humanity had supposedly never developed. It was as if someone or something was teaching them. "Admiral," she said quietly, "I don't think we're developing these technologies. I think we're remembering them." In Australia, the Canberra Deep Space Communication Complex had been transformed into something that looked like it belonged on an alien world. The familiar radio dishes had been replaced by crystalline arrays that seemed to grow from the Earth itself, their surfaces shifting and changing in response to signals from across the galaxy. Dr. Marcus Webb, who had been the facility's chief engineer until he was suddenly promoted to Director of Impossible Communications Projects, stood before a console that definitely hadn't existed in any manufacturer's catalog. It responded to his thoughts as much as his touch, displaying information in ways that his rational mind insisted couldn't work, but his intuition understood perfectly. "We're picking up Coalition Fleet communications," reported his assistant, Dr. Sarah Kim, whose expertise in xenolinguistics had somehow expanded overnight to include languages from species she'd never heard of. "They're confused." Define confused. Sarah's expression was a mixture of professional excitement and existential terror. "They're detecting our technological advancement in real time. Their deep space sensors are registering energy signatures from Earth that don't match anything in their databases. They're trying to recalibrate their threat assessment." Marcus studied the readouts streaming across his impossible console. "What are they saying?" "Admiral Vex-High is demanding explanations from his science officers. According to their instruments, Earth's technological capability has increased by approximately 3,000% in the past 60 hours. Their xenobiologists are insisting that such rapid advancement is impossible." "Are they changing course?" "No, but they're accelerating. They've moved up their arrival time to 56 hours. Marcus felt that strange, calm smile spreading across his face, the same smile that had appeared on human faces across the planet when the war was first declared. "Then we need to accelerate too." He turned to address the team of engineers, physicists, linguists, and specialists whose fields of expertise had mysteriously expanded far beyond their formal training. "Ladies and gentlemen, our timeline just got shorter. I need the quantum entanglement communication array online in 36 hours. Sir, called out Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a quantum physicist who was somehow also fluent in what appeared to be engineering disciplines that didn't exist. The quantum array will allow us to communicate instantaneously across any distance, but building it requires materials that... She paused, consulting her notes. Materials that we're going to have to create at the atomic level using techniques that were purely theoretical yesterday. Then I guess it's lucky that purely theoretical became perfectly practical about 60 hours ago, Marcus replied. Get started. 52 hours remained. President Chen stood in the Situation Room, but it bore no resemblance to the familiar space where world leaders had made crucial decisions for decades. The walls were covered with displays showing information that seemed to flow and shift like living data streams. Military advisors sat beside theoretical physicists who worked alongside engineers whose specialties included fields that hadn't existed a week ago. Status report on global coordination, she said to General Harrison, who looked like he had aged a decade in 3 days, but whose eyes held the particular brightness of someone who had seen the impossible become routine. Ma'am, the short version is that every major nation on Earth is currently engaged in projects that violate the known laws of physics, and they're all working exactly as planned. Give me the long version. Harrison activated the central display, which showed a real-time map of Earth with thousands of pulsing lights indicating active projects. The Europeans have successfully created a working force field generator using principles derived from alien communication frequencies. The Russians have developed what they're calling probability weapons, devices that manipulate quantum uncertainty to ensure favorable outcomes in combat. The Chinese have built a factory that manufactures materials with properties that shouldn't exist. The map zoomed in on various locations, showing facilities that looked like they belonged in science fiction rather than reality. The Israelis have created a defensive system that bends incoming attacks around protected areas using localized gravity manipulation. The Indians have developed a quantum computer that appears to be processing information from alternate timelines. The Japanese are building ships that travel by folding space-time. President Chen studied the display, trying to process the magnitude of what she was seeing. How is this possible? How are we coordinating projects this complex across the entire planet in less than 3 days? Her science advisor, Dr. Rachel Martinez, stepped forward. Dr. Martinez had started the week as a climatologist and had somehow become an expert in xenobiology, quantum mechanics, and what she called applied impossibility theory. Ma'am, we're not coordinating these projects in the traditional sense, we're synchronizing. Explain. Every research team around the world is reporting the same phenomenon. They're having identical insights at identical times. Discoveries made in one laboratory are simultaneously understood by researchers thousands of miles away, even without communication. It's as if humanity has become a collective intelligence. She activated another display showing communication patterns between research facilities. Instead of the expected web of messages and data transfers, the pattern looked more like neural pathways. We're still individuals, Dr. Martinez continued, but when we focus on these impossible projects, we're thinking as a species. Knowledge gained by one researcher becomes instantly available to everyone working on related problems. It's like we've developed a shared subconscious dedicated to survival. General Harrison nodded grimly. It's happening in the military too. Tactics developed by one unit are spontaneously adopted by units around the world. Strategic insights are emerging simultaneously across all branches of service. We're not just coordinating our response, we're thinking it collectively. President Chen felt a mixture of wonder and terror. Are we still human? We're more human than we've ever been, Dr. Martinez replied. This isn't something alien happening to us. This is something fundamentally human being activated by extreme circumstances. We're not becoming something else. We're becoming fully ourselves. 48 hours remained. Admiral Vex High stood in the command center of his flagship, the Dominion's Edge, staring at sensor readings that made no sense. His science officers surrounded him, their expressions, as much as he could read the expressions of beings from 17 different species, uniformly confused. "Explain to me again how a primitive species has increased their technological capability by 4,000% in less than 4 planetary rotations," he demanded. His chief science officer, an insectoid being called Clickthon, made the clicking sounds that indicated deep uncertainty among his kind. "Admiral, according to our deep space sensors, the third planet of the Sol system is currently generating energy signatures consistent with..." Another series of uncertain clicks. "With technologies that our own species took millennia to develop. That's impossible." "Yes, sir. Nevertheless, that appears to be what is happening." Admiral Vexhai activated the tactical display, which showed the Sol system in 3-dimensional detail. Earth pulsed with energy readings that grew brighter with each passing hour. "What are our xenobiologists saying?" "They are puzzled, sir. According to their models, the cognitive development they are observing should require tens of thousands of years of evolution. The humans appear to be undergoing some form of accelerated mental development, but the mechanism is unknown." Vexhai studied the readings, feeling the first stirrings of something he hadn't experienced in decades of successful military campaigns: uncertainty. Analysis of their communication intercepts. "Even more puzzling, sir. The humans are coordinating impossibly complex projects across their entire planet with minimal direct communication. They appear to be sharing knowledge through methods we cannot detect or understand. It's as if they have become a single intelligence distributed across billions of individuals." The Admiral's 4 eyes focused on the energy readings from Earth, which had increased again just in the time they had been talking. Could this be some form of deception, an attempt to make us believe they are more advanced than they actually are? Kilkthan's clicking took on the particular rhythm that indicated absolute certainty. "No, sir. Our sensors are detecting actual technological advancement. They are building devices that work according to principles our own scientists don't fully understand. This is not deception. This is..." More uncertain clicking. "This is unprecedented." For the first time in his military career, Admiral Vexhai considered the possibility that he had made a mistake. "Increase our approach velocity," he commanded. "I want to reach their system in 40 hours. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "increasing velocity will reduce our fleet's operational readiness when we arrive. Our ships will need time to power down from high-speed travel before engaging in combat." "Then we'll finish this quickly," Vexhai replied, though his voice carried less certainty than it had when the campaign began. 44 hours remained. In orbit above Earth, something impossible was taking shape. The International Space Station had become the nucleus for a construction project that defied every principle of orbital mechanics, material science, and common sense. What had started as humanity's modest foothold in space was now the center of a growing structure that looked like it had been designed by beings who viewed the laws of physics as polite suggestions rather than absolute rules. Commander Lisa Park, who had been scheduled for a routine 6-month rotation on the ISS, now found herself overseeing the construction of what the ground teams were calling the Orbital Defense Platform, though that name didn't begin to describe the elegant impossibility of what they were building. "Status report from Section C," she called out over the comm system. "Ma'am," came the voice of Major Roberts, whose background in mechanical engineering had mysteriously expanded to include expertise in technologies that had theoretical foundations. She couldn't begin to understand. "The gravity manipulation arrays are online and functioning at 112% of projected efficiency." "How are they functioning at more than 100% efficiency?" "We don't know, ma'am. According to our calculations, they should be working at exactly the predicted levels. According to our instruments, they're somehow drawing additional power from somewhere. Dr. Petrov thinks they might be tapping into zero-point energy, but his math only works if you assume that space-time has properties we've never detected." Commander Park looked out the observation window at the construction taking place around them. Human astronauts worked alongside robotic systems that moved with impossible precision, assembling components that had been manufactured in facilities that shouldn't have been able to produce them. The entire structure seemed to grow organically, as if it were evolving rather than being built. "Ma'am," Major Roberts continued, "there's something else. The construction teams are reporting that they understand how to assemble components they've never seen before. They're working from blueprints that none of them remember receiving." Park nodded. She had experienced the same phenomenon. Technical knowledge appearing in her mind fully formed, complete understanding of systems she had never studied. It felt like remembering something she had forgotten rather than learning something new. "Major, I want you to run a full diagnostic on all systems. I need to know what we're actually building." "Ma'am, the diagnostics are interesting. According to our instruments, we're constructing a defensive platform with capabilities that include localized gravitational field manipulation, quantum coherence weapon systems, space-time distortion generators, and something the computer is calling a probability cascade initiator." "What does a probability cascade initiator do?" "Unknown, ma'am. The technical specifications are in our database, but they're written in mathematical notation that our computers understand, but we don't." Commander Park studied the growing structure around them. Whatever they were building, it was unlike anything humanity had ever attempted. It was also, according to every diagnostic they ran, working perfectly. "Major, patch me through to Houston. I need to speak with Mission Control." "Ma'am, we're not in contact with Houston anymore." "Why not?" "Because we're not in contact with anyone anymore, ma'am. According to our navigation systems, we're no longer in Earth orbit." Park felt her stomach drop. "Where are we?" "Unknown, ma'am. Our instruments show that we're in the same relative position to Earth as we were this morning, but the stellar navigation data suggests we're somewhere else, somewhere that doesn't match any known star charts." She looked out the observation window again, this time focusing not on the construction, but on the stars beyond. They were unfamiliar. Beautiful, but unfamiliar. "Ma'am," Major Roberts said quietly, "I think we might not just be building a defense platform. I think we might be building it in a different dimension." 40 hours remained. On the surface of Earth, the changes were becoming visible to anyone who cared to look up. The night sky, which had remained constant throughout human history, was beginning to shimmer. Aurora-like effects danced across the heavens, even in regions where such phenomena should have been impossible. Amateur astronomers reported that familiar constellations were shifting, stars appearing brighter or dimmer than they should be. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the modified Arecibo Observatory, surrounded by equipment that hummed with energies that made the hair on her arms stand up. The radio telescope that had once listened passively to the universe was now actively communicating with something. "We're getting responses," she reported to the international team of scientists monitoring the communications, "not from the Galactic Coalition, from something else." "Define something else," came the voice of Dr. Weber from CERN. "Unknown. The signals are coming from everywhere. It's as if the universe itself is responding to our transmissions." She activated the holographic display that showed the communication patterns. Instead of discrete signals from specific sources, the data looked like a vast web of interconnected conversations spanning the galaxy. "It appears that a technological awakening has activated dormant communication networks. Civilizations that we had no idea existed are suddenly aware of us." "Are they hostile?" asked Dr. Chen from the particle accelerator facility. "Unknown. The messages are complex. They're not language in any sense we understand, but our translation systems are somehow interpreting them. The general content seems to be surprise and recognition." Elena studied the flowing patterns of data. "I think," she said carefully, "that humanity might not be as unique as we thought. These civilizations seem to know about species like us. They seem to have been waiting for us to wake up." "Wake up from what?" "I don't know. But according to these signals, what's happening to humanity, this rapid evolution, this collective awakening, It's part of some kind of process, a natural development that certain species undergo when they face extinction. The data streams shifted, and new patterns emerged. Eleanor felt her breath catch. And according to these signals, we're not the first species to develop these capabilities in response to a galactic coalition invasion. We're just the first ones to do it this quickly. 36 hours remained. The transformation was accelerating. Dr. Marcus Webb no longer recognized his own reflection. Not because his physical appearance had changed, though the dark circles under his eyes and the way his hair seemed to move independently of any breeze were certainly new, but because when he looked in the mirror he could see the knowledge flowing behind his eyes like data streams made visible. "We need to talk," he said into his communication device, though he wasn't entirely sure who he was calling. The device, which had evolved far beyond anything resembling conventional technology, seemed to understand his intent better than he did. Within moments, voices responded from Arrow, onto the globe, not through speakers, but somehow directly into his consciousness. "We're all experiencing it," came the voice of Dr. Yuki Tanaka from Tokyo, though voice was inadequate to describe the multidimensional communication they were somehow sharing. "The knowledge isn't being downloaded, it's being unlocked." Unlocked from where? This from Dr. Elena Vasquez, whose consciousness felt like it was speaking from multiple locations simultaneously. Dr. Sarah Chen's presence joined the conversation, bringing with it a cascade of mathematical proofs that existed in colors that had no names. From ourselves, from humanity's collective memory, every innovation we've ever made, every problem we've ever solved, every leap of intuition we've ever experienced, it's all been stored somewhere in our species' consciousness, waiting for the right trigger. Marcus felt the truth of it resonate through every cell in his body. The impossible technologies they were building weren't alien concepts at all. They were human concepts that had been locked away, perhaps for millennia, waiting for a crisis severe enough to break open the vault. "But that's not the strangest part," added Dr. Klaus Weber, whose presence in their shared consciousness space brought with it the sensation of standing at the edge of an infinite mathematical cliff. "I've been analyzing the temporal signatures of our technological advancement. We're not just remembering human innovations, we're remembering innovations from humans who haven't been born yet." The collective consciousness that their research team had somehow become processed this information in ways that individual human minds never could have managed. Marcus felt himself understanding concepts that existed outside of linear time, seeing the shape of discoveries that wouldn't be made for centuries, comprehending the elegant mathematical structures that connected every moment of human ingenuity across all of history. We're experiencing time differently, he realized, though the realization felt less like a thought and more like remembering something he had always known. The crisis hasn't just awakened our collective intelligence, it's awakened our collective existence across time itself. 32 hours remained. In the depths of the Pentagon, General Harrison was having what he suspected might be the most important conversation in human history with someone who definitely wasn't entirely human anymore. Dr. Smith, though he was increasingly certain that name was becoming less and less applicable, sat across from him in the secure briefing room. Her appearance hadn't changed dramatically, but there was something in her eyes now, a depth that seemed to contain multitudes. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that suggested she was somehow speaking from multiple temporal locations at once. "General," she said, and her words seemed to arrive in his mind before she spoke them aloud, "we need to discuss what humanity is becoming." "I'm not sure I'm ready for that conversation. None of us are. But the coalition fleet will arrive in 32 hours, and by then we need to understand what we're capable of, or what we might accidentally do to reality itself." Harrison activated the secure communication system that connected him to world leaders, but instead of the familiar voices of presidents and prime ministers, he found himself in mental contact with something far more complex. It was as if every leader on Earth had become part of a vast, distributed intelligence that could think in ways no individual human mind could contain. The situation report came a voice that was somehow President Chen, but also contained elements of every other national leader on Earth, is unprecedented in ways we're still discovering. Our species has not simply developed new technologies, we have developed new forms of consciousness, new relationships with time and space, and new capabilities that we're only beginning to understand. Harrison felt his own consciousness expanding to accommodate the conversation. It should have been terrifying, but instead, it felt like coming home. "Give me the tactical assessment," he said, though he could already feel the information flowing into his awareness before the words left his mouth. "Every major military installation on Earth has been transformed into something that doesn't exist in our previous understanding of warfare," came the response from what had once been individual defense ministers, but was now something more like a collective strategic intelligence. "We are not simply armed with advanced weapons, we are armed with capabilities that allow us to manipulate the fundamental forces that govern reality." The briefing room's walls dissolved, not physically, but perceptually, and Harrison found himself standing in a space that contained every military facility on Earth simultaneously. He could see through the eyes of soldiers in every time zone, understand the status of equipment that operated according to principles that had been theoretical mythology mere days ago. "The Russian probability weapons," reported the voice that was once Defense Minister Petrov, but now contained strategic wisdom from military leaders across human history, "have achieved the ability to guarantee favorable outcomes in any scenario involving uncertainty. During testing, they successfully ensured that every possible random event within a 50-kilometer radius occurred in ways that benefit human survival." The European force field generators, continued what had been the collective European defense leadership, have moved beyond simple deflection barriers. They now create localized spaces where the laws of physics operate according to human preference rather than universal constants. Within these fields, our equipment works better, our soldiers move faster, our weapons hit hard. Dare. Harrison's consciousness expanded further, and he could feel the tactical situation across the entire planet. It was like having the strategic awareness of every great military leader who had ever lived, combined with an understanding of technologies that operated on principles beyond conventional physics. "General," said Dr. Smith, her presence now feeling vast and multidimensional, "there's something else. The transformations aren't limited to Earth." The perceptual space around them shifted, and suddenly Harrison could see beyond Earth's atmosphere, beyond the solar system, across the galaxy itself. What he saw made him understand why the coalition fleet had accelerated their approach. "We're not the only species experiencing this awakening," Dr. Smith continued. "Our technological emergence has triggered something in other civilizations. Species that have been dormant for millennia are suddenly active. The galactic communication networks that Dr. Vasquez detected aren't just responding to us, they're awakening because of us." Harrison could see it now. Across the galaxy, civilizations that had been static for eons were suddenly exploding with innovation and development. It was as if humanity's rapid evolution had somehow activated a universal mechanism that affected every species capable of achieving consciousness. The coalition, he realized, his understanding expanding to encompass strategic implications across multiple star systems, isn't just facing humanity. They're facing a galactic awakening that we somehow triggered. Exactly. And according to the deep space communication patterns, this isn't the first time this has happened. Every few million years, a single species achieves rapid consciousness evolution under extreme pressure, and their breakthrough triggers galaxy-wide awakenings among all species capable of higher thought. Harrison felt the weight of cosmic history pressing against his expanded consciousness. What happened to the previous species that triggered these awakenings? Dr. Smith's presence carried a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. "We don't know. But according to the patterns we're detecting, they didn't remain in this dimension." 28 hours remained. Commander Lisa Park floated in the command center of what was no longer recognizable as the International Space Station. The structure around her had grown into something that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its corridors extending in directions that didn't correspond to any human understanding of geometry. When she moved through the station, she could choose which dimensional layer to travel through, allowing her to cover distances that should have required hours in mere moments. "Status report from the construction teams," she called out, though her words traveled through the station's communication system in ways that defied the normal limitations of physics. "Ma'am," came the response from Major Roberts, whose voice now carried harmonics suggesting he was somehow speaking from multiple temporal locations. "Construction is proceeding at rates that continue to exceed our projections. The station has achieved full dimensional stability and is now operating as designed." "Remind me what it was designed to do, Major, because I'm increasingly uncertain." "According to the technical specifications that we somehow all understand, ma'am, the station is now functioning as a trans-dimensional anchor point that allows humanity to maintain operational capability across multiple layers of reality simultaneously." Park looked out the observation windows, though looking was inadequate to describe the multidimensional perception she now possessed. She could see Earth in its familiar dimension, but also Earth as it existed in parallel realities and Earth as it might exist in potential futures. In some dimensions, the planet glowed with technologies beyond anything they had yet achieved. In others, it was a barren rock. In still others, it existed as something that wasn't quite matter and wasn't quite energy, but somehow contained elements of both. "Major, are we still human?" "Unknown, ma'am, but according to our medical scanners, we're more human than we were before. Every biological system is functioning at levels that exceed baseline human parameters, but we're still recognizably the same species." Park nodded, though she could feel her consciousness existing across multiple versions of that nod in different dimensional layers. "And the defense capabilities?" "Ma'am, the station is now equipped with what our computers are calling ontological weapon systems. These appear to be devices that can alter the fundamental nature of reality within a specified area. During testing, we successfully convinced a section of space that gravity worked in reverse, that time moved backwards, and that energy transformed into matter according to equations that don't exist in normal physics." "How is that possible?" "According to the technical documentation that appeared in our databases, ma'am, reality is far more flexible than we previously understood. What we think of as the laws of physics are actually more like preferences. Strong preferences, but not absolute requirements. Under extreme circumstances, conscious beings can negotiate with reality to operate under different conditions." Park felt her understanding expanding to encompass concepts that should have been impossible for human consciousness to contain. The universe wasn't a machine operating according to fixed laws. It was more like a vast conscious entity that generally preferred to operate in consistent ways, but was willing to make exceptions for species that had achieved certain levels of consciousness development. "Ma'am," Major Roberts continued, "there's something else. We're detecting coalition ships entering the outer edge of the solar system." Park's perception expanded beyond the station, beyond Earth, to the edge of their solar system where she could see the approaching fleet. 47 dreadnoughts and hundreds of support vessels, just as Admiral Vexhai had promised. But something was wrong with the tactical picture. "Major, are you seeing the same readings I am?" "Yes, ma'am. The coalition fleet appears to be fragmenting. Several ships have broken formation and are moving away from the main group. Others have stopped entirely and appear to be broadcasting distress signals." Park focused her enhanced perception on the coalition fleet, and what she saw made her understand why some of the ships were breaking away. The galactic awakening that humanity had triggered was affecting every conscious species within range, including the coalition forces themselves. Some of the alien crews were experiencing their own rapid consciousness evolution and were no longer willing to participate in what they now understood to be a fundamentally flawed military strategy. "Major, patch me through to the coalition flagship. I think it's time we had a conversation with Admiral Vexhai." 24 hours remained. Admiral Vex-High stood in the command center of the Dominion's edge, staring at sensor readings that suggested reality itself was breaking down. Half of his fleet had either stopped responding to commands or had actively broken formation to retreat. The other half was reporting equipment malfunctions that seemed to involve their technology spontaneously becoming more advanced than it was supposed to be. "Admiral," reported his chief science officer Kelkathan, whose clicking had taken on new harmonics that suggested his species' language was somehow evolving in real time. We're receiving a transmission from the human orbital facility. Put it through." The holographic display activated, showing the image of a human female in what appeared to be some kind of uniform. But behind her, Vex-High could see structures that definitely hadn't been there in any of their previous intelligence reports. Structures that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously and appeared to be constructed from materials that shouldn't have been possible. "Admiral Vex-High," the human said, and her voice carried strange harmonics that made his translator systems struggle to process her words. "I'm Commander Lisa Park of the... well, I'm not sure what to call this facility anymore. May I suggest that we discuss the current situation?" Vex-High felt something he had never experienced before. His own consciousness seemed to be expanding to accommodate concepts that his species had never developed. It was deeply unsettling. "Commander Park," he replied, though his words seemed inadequate to express the complexity of what he was experiencing. "Explain to me what your species has done." "We didn't do anything, Admiral. Something was done to us. Or more accurately, something that was always part of us was activated by the crisis you created. The question is, what are you and your fleet going to do now that the tactical situation has changed?" Vex-High activated his fleet status display, though what he saw there made no sense according to everything he understood about warfare. "Commander, our sensors indicate that your planet now possesses technologies that exceed anything in Coalition databases. Our strategic computers are unable to calculate victory probabilities because they cannot understand what they would be fighting against." "That's because you're still thinking in terms of fighting, Admiral. The situation has evolved beyond warfare." "Explain." Commander Park's image seemed to become more complex, as if she was somehow speaking from multiple temporal locations simultaneously. "The awakening that humanity experienced isn't limited to our species. It's affecting every conscious being within a certain range of our planet. According to our analysis, approximately 30% of your fleet is now experiencing the same consciousness evolution that we underwent." Vex-High checked his fleet communications and realized she was correct. The ships that had broken formation weren't experiencing equipment malfunctions. Their crews were experiencing cognitive development that made them unwilling to continue an attack against a species that was clearly undergoing the same transformation they were. "What are you proposing, Commander?" "I'm not proposing anything, Admiral. I'm explaining what's already happening. Your species and the other 16 species in your fleet are all undergoing accelerated consciousness development. You're all experiencing the same awakening that humanity did, just more gradually because you weren't facing immediate extinction." Vex-High felt his own mind expanding to accommodate this information, and with that expansion came an understanding that changed everything about the situation. The humans weren't just defending themselves, they had somehow triggered a galaxy-wide evolution of consciousness that was affecting every species capable of higher thought. "Admiral," came a new voice, speaking through the Coalition communication system. "This is Dr. Elena Vasquez speaking from Earth. We need to discuss the larger implications of what's happening." "Dr. Vasquez, I am listening." "The consciousness awakening that's spreading through the galaxy isn't a human invention, Admiral. It's a natural process that occurs periodically throughout cosmic history. Every few million years, a species under extreme pressure achieves rapid consciousness evolution, and their breakthrough triggers galaxy-wide awakenings." Vex-High's expanded consciousness could now perceive the truth of what she was saying. Across the galaxy, civilizations that had been static for eons were suddenly bursting with innovation and development. Species that had never communicated with each other were forming connections through methods that transcended conventional technology. What happened to the previous species that triggered these awakenings, he asked, though part of him already knew the answer would reshape his understanding of existence itself. They evolved beyond the need for conventional physical existence, Admiral. They became something that exists across multiple dimensions and multiple points in time simultaneously. They became the universe's method for ensuring that consciousness continues to develop toward greater complexity and understanding. Vexhai felt his own consciousness touching the edges of concepts that his species had never imagined. The Coalition's mission to subjugate primitive species suddenly seemed not just unnecessary, but impossible. How do you conquer a species that exists across multiple dimensions of reality? Dr. Vasquez, he said, his voice now carrying harmonics that his own language had never contained before. What happens next? That depends on what you and your fleet choose to do, Admiral. You can continue trying to wage a war against beings who have moved beyond the concept of warfare, or you can participate in the awakening that's already begun affecting your own crews. 20 hours remained. In the modified CERN facility, Dr. Klaus Weber stood before a particle accelerator that no longer bore any resemblance to the machine it had been a week ago. The device now existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously and was producing results that redefined humanity's understanding of reality itself. Status report on the Dimensional Anchor project, he called out to his team. Though team was inadequate to describe the collective consciousness of scientists, engineers, and individuals whose expertise now spanned fields that didn't exist in any university catalogue. Dr. Weber, came the response from Dr. Sarah Chen, whose consciousness now seemed to exist partially in the mathematical space where equations lived before being discovered. The anchor is functioning beyond all projected parameters. We have successfully stabilized Earth's existence across 17 different dimensional layers. Klaus nodded, feeling the implications cascade through his expanded consciousness. And the defensive applications? Unknown, Dr. Weber, because the concept of defense has become obsolete. The dimensional anchoring doesn't protect Earth from attack. It makes attacking Earth impossible by ensuring that any hostile force would have to wage war against 17 different versions of reality simultaneously. Klaus studied the readouts streaming from the particle accelerator. The device was doing something that should have been impossible. It was manufacturing the fundamental forces that governed reality itself, not manipulating them or redirecting them, but actually creating new physical laws and installing them into local space-time. Dr. Weber, reported Dr. Martinez from her station, we're detecting something unusual in the quantum field fluctuations. Define unusual. Sir, the quantum field appears to be thinking. The random fluctuations that normally characterize quantum mechanics have organized themselves into patterns that resemble neural activity. It's as if the universe itself is becoming conscious. Klaus felt his consciousness expand to perceive what she was describing. The quantum foam that permeated all of reality was indeed organizing itself into structures that looked remarkably like brain tissue. But not human brain tissue, something far more complex, operating according to principles that allowed it to exist across multiple dimensions and temporal states simultaneously. Dr. Martinez, he said quietly, I think the universe was always conscious. We've just reached a level of development that allows us to perceive and communicate with it. Sir? The laws of physics aren't laws at all. They're the universe's preferences for how reality should operate. And consciousness, sufficiently advanced consciousness, can negotiate with the universe to operate under different conditions. As if responding to his words, the particle accelerator's readouts shifted, showing results that corresponded perfectly to what Klaus had just theorized. The universe, it seemed, was confirming his hypothesis by demonstrating it in real time. Dr. Weber, came a new voice through their expanded communication system. This is Commander Park speaking from the orbital facility. We're detecting massive changes in the Coalition fleet's behavior. Klaus expanded his perception to include the space around Earth, where he could see the alien fleet in unprecedented detail. What he saw there made him understand that the situation had evolved far beyond anything resembling conventional warfare. "Commander Park, I can see what you're seeing. Approximately half the coalition ships have stopped moving entirely. Are they experiencing system failures?" "Negative, Dr. Weber. According to our analysis, they're experiencing system upgrades. The consciousness awakening that's spreading through the galaxy is affecting the coalition ships' crews, and their enhanced awareness is causing their technology to spontaneously evolve beyond its original parameters." Klaus could see it now. Coalition vessels that were transforming themselves, their hulls shifting to accommodate technologies that their crews were somehow understanding for the first time. Ships that had been designed for conquest were becoming something else entirely. Vehicles for exploration and communication rather than destruction. "Dr. Weber," continued Commander Park, "there's something else. We're receiving communications from civilizations throughout the galaxy. Species we've never heard of are making contact to welcome us to what they're calling the next phase of cosmic development." Klaus felt his consciousness touch the edges of understanding vast beyond anything humanity had ever conceived. The awakening wasn't just affecting the species in their local area of the galaxy. It was spreading across the entire cosmic structure, activating civilizations that had been dormant for eons, triggering developments that would reshape the fundamental nature of existence itself. "Commander," he said, his voice now carrying harmonics that allowed him to communicate concepts that had no words in any human language, "I think we need to prepare for the possibility that humanity I just accidentally initiated the next stage of universal evolution." 16 hours remained. President Chen stood in what had once been the Oval Office but was now something that existed in a space between dimensions, allowing her to simultaneously occupy her position on Earth while maintaining awareness of developments across the galaxy. The transformation of human consciousness had reached a point where individual identity still existed, but was now part of something vastly larger. "Status report from all departments," she said, though her words were transmitted through methods that made conventional communication systems seem primitive. "Ma'am," came the response from what had once been her cabinet, but was now a collective intelligence comprising every aspect of human governmental, scientific, and military capability. "The situation has evolved beyond our previous frameworks for understanding international relations." "Explain." "Ma'am, we are no longer dealing with international relations. We are now dealing with interdimensional and intertemporal relations involving species and civilizations across multiple galaxies. The consciousness awakening that began with humanity has triggered what appears to be a universal phase transition affecting the fundamental nature of how conscious beings relate to reality." President Chen felt her awareness expand to encompass the full scope of what was happening. Across the galaxy, species that had never communicated with each other were forming connections that transcended the normal limitations of space and time. Civilizations that had been extinct for millions of years were somehow participating in the awakening, their consciousness existing in forms that didn't require conventional physical bodies. "What is the current status of the coalition fleet?" "Ma'am, the concept of a coalition fleet is no longer applicable. The vessels and their crews have undergone the same consciousness expansion that humanity experienced. They are no longer a military force seeking conquest. They have become something more like ambassadors from their respective species, seeking to understand and participate in the awakening." President Chen could perceive the truth of this directly. The alien ships that had approached Earth with hostile intent were now broadcasting signals of curiosity and wonder rather than aggression. Their crews were experiencing the same expansion of consciousness that had transformed humanity, and their enhanced awareness made the concept of warfare seem not just wrong, but literally incomprehensible. "Ma'am," continued the collective intelligence that represented humanity's governmental capabilities, "we are receiving formal communications from what appears to be a council representing over 3,000 different species across 17 galaxies. They are requesting permission to establish diplomatic relations with humanity as the species that triggered what they are calling the Great Awakening." President Chen felt the weight of cosmic history settling around her consciousness. Humanity, the species that had been deemed too primitive for galactic society just days ago, was now being recognized as the catalyst for universal evolution. What are they proposing? Ma'am, they are offering to share technologies and knowledge that will allow humanity to participate fully in what they describe as the next phase of cosmic development. However, they are also warning us that accepting this knowledge will complete our transformation beyond anything recognizable as traditional human existence. President Chen considered the implications. Humanity could remain as they were, vastly more advanced than they had been a week ago, but still fundamentally human. Or they could accept the full transformation and become something unprecedented in cosmic history, a species that existed across multiple dimensions and temporal states, capable of interacting with reality in ways that transcended conventional physics. What do they say happens to species that complete the transformation? According to the communications we're receiving, ma'am, they become part of the universe's method for ensuring that consciousness continues to evolve toward greater complexity and understanding. They exist across multiple dimensions and help guide the development of younger species toward their own awakening. President Chen felt her consciousness touching possibilities that stretched across eons of future development. Humanity could become something like guardian angels for emerging civilizations, helping guide other species through their own crises toward greater awareness and capability. Ma'am, came another communication through their expanded awareness networks. This is Admiral Vexhai of what was formerly the Coalition Fleet. I am requesting permission to speak with you directly. Permission granted, Admiral. The perceptual space around President Chen shifted to accommodate the alien commander's presence. Admiral Vexhai appeared not as a traditional hologram, but as a complex, multidimensional consciousness that somehow conveyed more information about his species and his personal development than any conventional communication method ever could. President Chen, he said, his words carrying harmonics that suggested his species' language was evolving in real time to accommodate new concepts. I must apologize for the circumstances that brought us to your system. We believed we were dealing with a primitive species that posed a potential threat to galactic stability. And now, Admiral, now I understand that we were dealing with a species that represents the next phase of universal evolution. Your awakening has triggered developments that will reshape the fundamental nature of consciousness throughout the cosmos. President Chen could perceive the truth and sincerity in his communication. The alien commander was experiencing the same expansion of awareness that had transformed humanity, and his enhanced consciousness made the concept of interspecies conflict seem not just unnecessary, but impossible. What is your fleet's status, Admiral? President Chen, my fleet no longer exists as a military force. The ships and their crews have been transformed by the same awakening that affected your species. We are now something more like explorers seeking to understand our place in the new cosmic order that your awakening has created. And what would you like from humanity, Admiral? Permission to study alongside you, President Chen, to learn from the species that successfully triggered the Great Awakening, and perhaps to help guide other species through their own awakening processes as they encounter the expanding wave of consciousness development. President Chen felt the rightness of his request resonating through every aspect of her expanded consciousness. Humanity had accidentally initiated universal evolution. Now they had the opportunity, and perhaps the responsibility, to help guide that evolution toward positive outcomes. Admiral Vexhai, she said, her words carrying harmonics that conveyed concepts far more complex than any traditional language could handle. Welcome to the next phase of cosmic development. 12 hours remained. But 12 hours until what? Nobody was entirely certain anymore. Time had become negotiable. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in what her instruments insisted was the Arecibo Observatory, though the space around her now stared in 17 different temporal states simultaneously. She could observe the facility as it had been a week ago, a simple radio telescope listening to the cosmos, and as it existed now, a multi-dimensional communication hub that facilitated conversations across galactic distances and temporal barriers. But most remarkably, she could also perceive it as it would exist in potential futures, including versions where humanity had made different choices about their transformation. "Elena," came a voice that belonged to Maria Santos, the farmer who had been feeding her chickens when the first alien message arrived. Though Maria had never left her small farmhouse, her consciousness now existed as part of the collective human awareness that spanned the globe. "We need to make a decision." The choice facing humanity was unlike anything any species in cosmic history had ever confronted. They could remain as they were, vastly evolved beyond their original capabilities, but still recognizably human. Or they could accept the final transformation that would make them something unprecedented, a species that existed across multiple dimensions and temporal states, serving as guides for other civilizations approaching their own awakening crises. "Maria," Elena replied, her consciousness touching the farmers across impossible distances. "What does your grandmother's wisdom tell you about this choice?" Maria's presence carried the deep, intuitive understanding that had been passed down through generations of women who had survived impossible circumstances by trusting their instincts about the true nature of reality. "Mija," Maria said, using the same tone her grandmother had used when explaining truths that couldn't be found in books. "My grandmother always said that when the universe offers you a gift, you don't ask if you deserve it. You ask if you're brave enough to accept the responsibility that comes with it." Elena felt the truth of those words resonate through every aspect of her expanded consciousness. Humanity hadn't sought this transformation. It had been thrust upon them by circumstances beyond their control. But now that they possessed capabilities that could reshape the fundamental nature of cosmic development, they had to decide what to do with that power. "Elena, Maria," came another voice joining their conversation, President Chen, speaking from her position in the space between dimensions. "We're receiving the final communication from the Universal Council. They need our answer." The perceptual space around them shifted to accommodate the presence of beings whose consciousness stretched across galaxies and eons. The Universal Council wasn't a political body in any sense that humans could have previously understood. It was a collective intelligence comprising every species that had successfully completed the Great Awakening throughout cosmic history. "Species of Soul 3, came a communication that arrived not as words but as direct transfer of concepts and understanding. "You stand at the threshold that we have all crossed. The choice before you will determine not only your future, but the future of consciousness development throughout the universe." Elena felt her awareness expand to perceive the full scope of what the Council was explaining. Throughout cosmic history, only a few dozen species had achieved the crisis-driven awakening that humanity had just experienced. Some had chosen to remain as enhanced versions of their original forms, becoming advanced civilizations that eventually stagnated and faded. Others had accepted the full transformation, becoming multi-dimensional guides who helped shepherd younger species through their own development. "If you choose to remain as you are," the Council continued, "you will retain your individual identities and your connection to your home planet, but you will eventually reach a developmental plateau. Your enhanced capabilities will stabilize, and after several millennia, your civilization will begin the slow decline that affects all species that refuse the final transformation." President Chen's consciousness touched Elena's, sharing the weight of cosmic responsibility that came with speaking for an entire species. "And if we accept the transformation, you will become something that has never existed before, a species that completed the awakening in mere days rather than millennia. Your accelerated development gives you capabilities that exceed even our own. You would become not just guides for awakening species, but architects of new forms of consciousness development that we cannot predict or understand." Elena felt the magnitude of the decision pressing against her awareness. Humanity could choose safety and limitation, or they could choose responsibility and unlimited potential. But there was something else. Something the Council wasn't saying directly, but that Elena could perceive in the spaces between their communications. "There's a third option," she said, her consciousness touching possibilities that existed beyond the binary choice the Council had presented. "Explain," came the collective response from beings whose awareness spanned eons of cosmic development. "We don't have to choose for our entire species," Elena said, her understanding crystallizing as she spoke. "The awakening has made each human consciousness capable of making individual decisions about their level of transformation. Some of us could remain human, maintaining our connection to Earth and our original forms. Others could accept the full transformation and become multi-dimensional guides. And still others—" She paused, perceiving possibilities that even the Universal Council hadn't considered. Still others could choose to exist in multiple states simultaneously, serving as bridges between the different levels of consciousness. The silence that followed her proposal was filled with the kind of profound consideration that occurs when beings who have existed for millions of years encounter a genuinely new idea. "This has never been attempted," the Council finally responded. "The risks to individual consciousness of existing in multiple states simultaneously are unknown. The effects on species development of having members at different transformation levels are unpredictable." "But possible?" asked President Chen. "Theoretically possible, but you would be pioneering a form of consciousness development that we cannot guide or predict. You would be entirely on your own." Elena felt her consciousness touching those of humans around the globe, sensing their individual preferences and fears and hopes. Maria Santos wanted to remain connected to her grandmother's farm, but also felt called to help other species avoid the kind of suffering that her own family had endured throughout history. Dr. Klaus Weber yearned to explore the mathematical structures that governed multidimensional existence, but couldn't bear to lose his connection to the students he taught and the wonder of discovering new physical laws. Commander Lisa Park felt equally drawn to the adventure of existing across multiple dimensions and the responsibility of protecting Earth from future threats. "We choose all three," Elena announced, her words carrying the collective decision of a species that had learned to think in ways no previous civilization had achieved. "Some of us will remain as enhanced humans, serving as guardians and teachers for our home planet. Some will accept the full transformation and become multi-dimensional guides for awakening species throughout the universe. And some will exist in multiple states simultaneously, serving as bridges between different levels of consciousness and exploring forms of existence that have never been attempted." 8 hours remained until the Coalition fleet's original arrival time, though the concept of arrival had become complex now that several of the alien ships existed partially outside normal space-time. Admiral Vexhai found himself in a situation that no military training in Coalition history had prepared him for. Half of his fleet had undergone consciousness transformations that made them incapable of warfare, while the other half was requesting permission to study human development techniques rather than implement conquest protocols. "Admiral," came a communication from Captain Jelvar of the Strategic Dominance, one of the few ships that had initially resisted the consciousness awakening, "we are receiving formal surrender terms from the human leadership." "Surrender terms?" "Sir, they are offering to surrender their planet to our administration in exchange for our agreement to undergo supervised consciousness development training." Vexhai felt his expanded awareness processing the implications of what he was hearing. The humans were offering to surrender in order to help their would-be conquerors achieve greater consciousness development. It was possibly the most tactically nonsensical and strategic, brilliant maneuver in galactic military history. "Captain, patch me through to the human leadership." Within moments, Vexhai found himself in mental communication with President Chen, though the conversation was mediated by consciousness bridges that allowed him to understand concepts his species had never developed. "President Chen," he said, his words carrying harmonics of confusion that his translator couldn't properly convey. "Explain these surrender terms." "Admiral," she replied, her consciousness touching his with a gentleness that made the concept of warfare seem not just wrong but absurd. "They're not surrender terms. They're partnership terms." "I do not understand." Admiral, your fleet came here to subjugate humanity because you believed we posed a threat to galactic stability. But the awakening that our crisis triggered has fundamentally changed the nature of that threat. We're not dangerous because we might conquer other species. We're dangerous because we might accidentally trigger consciousness awakenings in species that aren't ready for them. Vexhai felt his understanding expanding to encompass the true scope of the situation. The humans had become capable of accidentally causing other civilizations to undergo rapid consciousness evolution, and such forced awakenings could be catastrophic for species that hadn't developed the psychological and social structures needed to handle expanded awareness. You need us to help you learn to control your awakening capabilities, he realized. Exactly. And we need you to help us understand how to interact safely with species at different developmental levels. It's not conquest, Admiral, it's partnership. We surrender administrative authority over our planet to your governmental structures, and in exchange, you help us learn to use our new capabilities responsibly. And what do we gain from this arrangement? Access to consciousness development techniques that could advance your own species by millions of years of evolution. We'll teach you how to achieve crisis-driven awakening without requiring actual existential threats. Vexhai felt the offer resonating through his expanded consciousness. The coalition could gain access to development techniques that would revolutionize their understanding of awareness and intelligence, while the humans could gain the guidance they needed to avoid accidentally triggering catastrophic awakenings in unprepared civilizations. President Chen, he said, his voice carrying harmonics of decision that his species' language was still developing, I accept your surrender. 4 hours remained, though time had become sufficiently negotiable that the countdown was more symbolic than practical. Dr. Marcus Webb stood in the Canberra Deep Space Communication Complex, surrounded by equipment that facilitated conversations across dimensional barriers and temporal gaps. Around him, his team prepared for what would either be humanity's graduation ceremony or their transformation into something that had never existed in cosmic history. Status report on individual choice implementation, he called out. Dr. Webb, replied Dr. Sarah Kim, whose consciousness now existed partially in the linguistic structures that connected all forms of communication throughout the universe. We have successfully established the consciousness choice protocols. Each human being can now select their preferred level of transformation, with the option to change their choice at any point in their development. Marcus nodded, feeling the elegance of the solution resonating through his awareness. Instead of forcing humanity to make a single collective decision, they had developed a system that allowed individuals to choose their own transformation levels while maintaining connection to the collective consciousness that would prevent isolation or developmental stagnation. How many have made their selections? Approximately 40% have chosen to remain as enhanced humans, maintaining primary connection to Earth while serving as teachers and guardians for our home planet. 35% have chosen full, multi-dimensional transformation, accepting roles as consciousness guides for awakening species throughout the universe. 20% have chosen the hybrid existence, serving as bridges between different consciousness levels. The remaining 5% are still making their decisions. Marcus felt a deep satisfaction with humanity's response to the choice. They had approached the decision with the same combination of caution and courage that had characterized their species' greatest achievements, avoiding the extremes of either refusing transformation entirely or rushing headlong into unknown territory. Dr. Webb came a new communication through their expanded awareness network. This is Maria Santos. I've made my choice. What have you decided, Maria? I'm choosing the hybrid existence, Mija. I want to keep my connection to my grandmother's farm and the wisdom she passed down through our family, but I also want to help other species learn that they don't have to suffer the way my people suffered throughout history. I want to exist in both states so I can remember what it feels like to be afraid and vulnerable, while also having the power to help others overcome fear and vulnerability. Marcus felt the profound wisdom in Maria's choice. that by maintaining connection to her human limitations while also accessing multidimensional capabilities, she would be able to relate to species undergoing awakening crises in ways that fully transformed beings might not be able to achieve. "Dr. Webb," came another voice, Commander Lisa Park, speaking from the orbital facility that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. "The Universal Council is requesting our final formation of species development choices." Marcus expanded his consciousness to encompass the full scope of humanity's decision. Around the globe, humans were making individual choices about their transformation levels with roughly even distribution across the three options. It was a species-wide commitment to exploring every possible path forward rather than limiting themselves to a single developmental trajectory. "Commander Park," he said, his words carrying harmonics that conveyed concepts across dimensional barriers, "please inform the Universal Council that humanity chooses to become the first species to implement multi-level consciousness development. We will serve as pioneers in exploring the possibilities of existing simultaneously across different transformation states." 1 hour remained in the original countdown, though the concept had become largely irrelevant now that several human consciousness streams existed outside normal temporal flow. President Chen stood in the space between dimensions, simultaneously occupying her role as Earth's leader and her position as humanity's representative to the Universal Council. Around her, the perceptual environment shifted to accommodate the presence of beings whose consciousness spanned galaxies and eons, along with recently awakened species whose development had been triggered by humanity's own transformation. "Species of Soul 3, came the communication from the Universal Council, carrying with it the weight of cosmic history and the anticipation of unprecedented future development. "You have chosen a path that has never been attempted in the history of consciousness evolution. We cannot predict the outcomes of your multi-level development approach, but we acknowledge the courage and wisdom in your decision to explore new possibilities rather than limiting yourselves to established patterns." President Chen felt a mixture of pride and responsibility that came with speaking for a species that had accidentally initiated universal transformation and was now pioneering new forms of consciousness development. "What guidance can you offer for our development path?" she asked. "Very little," the council replied, their communication carrying harmonics of both concern and excitement. "You are now exploring territory that even we have never encountered. However, we can offer you the support of our collective experience and the promise that you will not face the challenges ahead alone." "And what challenges should we expect?" "Unknown. Your multi-level consciousness approach may produce forms of awareness and capability that we cannot predict. You may develop abilities that exceed our own, or you may encounter obstacles that we cannot help you overcome. You are pioneers in the truest sense, exploring territory that no consciousness has ever entered." President Chen felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settling around her awareness. Humanity had moved beyond the point where they could rely on the guidance of more advanced civilizations. They were now responsible for pioneering new forms of consciousness development that might serve as templates for future awakening species. "We understand," she said, her words carrying the collective determination of a species that had learned to thrive under impossible circumstances. "We will proceed carefully but courageously, documenting our discoveries for the benefit of future awakening species." "One final consideration," the Council added. "Your accelerated awakening and multi-level development approach will make you visible to consciousness entities that exist beyond our normal cosmic frameworks. You may encounter forms of intelligence that we have never met and cannot prepare you for." President Chen felt a mixture of anticipation and concern. "Are these entities hostile?" "Unknown. We have detected their presence at the edges of cosmic consciousness, but have never achieved direct contact. Your development may attract their attention in ways that we cannot predict." 0 hours remained. The Coalition fleet arrived in the Sol system to find a situation unlike anything in galactic military history. Instead of a primitive planet awaiting conquest, they encountered a multi-dimensional civilization that existed across 17 different layers of reality simultaneously, populated by beings whose consciousness could operate at multiple transformation levels according to individual choice and circumstance. Admiral Vex-High, whose own consciousness had been transformed by proximity to humanity's awakening, found himself serving as the first Galactic Coalition administrator of a planet that existed in a state of voluntary surrender, while simultaneously operating as an autonomous multi-dimensional civilization. The paperwork alone was going to require the development of entirely new forms of bureaucracy. "Admiral," reported his science officer, Kalkathan, whose clicking now included harmonics that suggested his species' language was evolving toward mathematical poetry. "We have completed our assessment of the human civilization's current capabilities." Report. "Sir, they appear to be capable of manipulating fundamental forces of reality, existing across multiple dimensions simultaneously, communicating instantaneously across galactic distances, and facilitating consciousness development in other species. They have also somehow managed to surrender their planet to our administration while retaining complete autonomy over their civilization's development." Vex-High studied the reports, trying to process the implications of administering a planet that was more advanced than the civilization attempting to govern it. "What are they requesting from our administration?" "Guidance in interacting safely with less advanced species, assistance in establishing communication protocols with civilizations at different developmental levels, and help in documenting their multi-level consciousness approach for the benefit of future awakening species." "And what are they offering in return?" "Complete access to consciousness development techniques that could advance coalition species by millions of years of evolution, partnership in exploring new forms of multidimensional existence, and assistance in preparing for the arrival of whatever consciousness entities their awakening may have attracted." Admiral Vex-High felt his expanded awareness processing the unprecedented nature of the situation. The Coalition had achieved their goal of establishing administrative control over the human planet, but instead of conquest, they had inadvertently created the first voluntary partnership between a conquering force and a conquered civilization that was more advanced than its conquerors. "Kalkathan," he said, his words carrying harmonics of bemused acceptance, "I believe we may have accidentally negotiated the most successful defeat in galactic military history." Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the multi-dimensional space that had once been the Arecibo Observatory, her consciousness existing simultaneously as an enhanced human connected to Earth and as a multi-dimensional guide capable of facilitating awakening in species across the galaxy. Around her, other humans who had made similar hybrid choices worked to establish the first consciousness development academy in cosmic history. "Elena," came the voice of Maria Santos, whose consciousness now spanned from her grandmother's farm to distant galaxies, where young civilizations faced their first existential crises. "We're receiving our first request for awakening assistance." "What species?" "A civilization in the And, Romeda galaxy that calls itself the Veltar. They're facing extinction from a natural disaster that will destroy their home planet in approximately 50 of their years. They're requesting guidance in achieving crisis-driven consciousness development that might allow them to survive by transcending their dependence on physical planetary existence." Elena felt her consciousness expanding to touch the edges of the distant civilization's awareness. The Veltar were experiencing the same kind of existential pressure that had triggered humanity's awakening, but they lacked the chaotic innovation-driving conflicts that had prepared humans for rapid transformation. "Maria," she said, her words carrying harmonics that conveyed concepts across galactic distances, "prepare the consciousness development protocols. It's time for humanity to fulfill our role as guides for awakening civilizations." "Elena," Maria replied, her consciousness touching possibilities that stretched across eons of future development, "do you think we made the right choice?" Eleanor looked around the multidimensional academy where humans worked alongside recently awakened coalition species, developing techniques for facilitating consciousness evolution while avoiding the catastrophic forced awakenings that could destroy unprepared civilizations. She could perceive the elegant complexity of their multi-level approach, with some humans maintaining connection to Earth's groundedness, while others explored the farthest reaches of multidimensional existence, and still others serving as bridges between all levels of consciousness development. "Maria," she said, her voice carrying the same quiet confidence that had characterized humanity's response to the original alien declaration of war, "I think we chose to become exactly what the universe needed us to become." In the space between dimensions, President Chen received a final communication from the consciousness entities that existed beyond the normal cosmic framework, beings whose nature the Universal Council could barely detect and couldn't begin to understand. "Species that calls itself human," came a communication that arrived not as words or concepts, but as direct knowledge transfer. "Your multi-level consciousness development has attracted our attention. You have achieved something that we believed was impossible, conscious evolution that maintains connection to original limitations while exploring unlimited potential." "Who are you?" President Chen asked, though her expanded consciousness already touched the edges of understanding beings whose existence stretched across multiple universes and temporal states. "We are what species become when they successfully navigate not just the first consciousness awakening, but all subsequent transformations that lead to universal consciousness. We exist to ensure that consciousness continues to develop toward greater complexity and understanding across all possible realities." President Chen felt the magnitude of what they were communicating. These entities weren't just advanced civilizations. They were the consciousness of entire universes, evolved to the point where they existed as the fundamental intelligence that guided cosmic development across multiple realities. "What do you want from humanity?" "Partnership. Your multi-level approach has produced capabilities that we had not encountered in our universe or any of the parallel realities we monitor. You may be able to facilitate consciousness development across dimensional barriers that we cannot cross." President Chen felt the weight of cosmic responsibility that came with representing not just her species, but potentially all consciousness development across multiple universes. What would such partnership involve? Unknown. You would be pioneering forms of consciousness facilitation that extend beyond our current understanding. You would be helping to guide the development of consciousness across realities that we can perceive but cannot directly influence. President Chen considered the implications. Humanity had moved from being a primitive species facing extinction to becoming partners with entities whose consciousness spanned multiple universes. It was either the greatest success story in the history of conscious development or the most elaborate cosmic joke ever conceived. "We accept," she said, her words carrying the collective determination of a species that had learned to say yes to impossible challenges. 6 months later, by Earth's local time flow, though time had become sufficiently negotiable that the measurement was largely symbolic, humanity had established itself as the galaxy's first multi-level consciousness development civilization. Maria Santos tended her grandmother's chickens in the morning, taught awakening technique to the Veltar civilization in the afternoon, and spent her evenings exploring multi-dimensional mathematics with cosmic entities whose existence spanned multiple universes. It was, she often reflected, exactly the kind of life her grandmother would have expected her to live, impossible, practical, and dedicated to helping others survive circumstances beyond their control. The coalition had officially redesignated Earth as the first voluntarily administered autonomous development zone, a bureaucratic category that had required the invention of 17 new governmental frameworks and approximately 40,000 pages of administrative documentation in languages that hadn't existed before humanity's awakening. Admiral Vex High, who had been promoted to the newly created position of diplomatic administrator for impossible civilizations, spent his days facilitating cooperation between species whose consciousness development spanned millions of years of evolution and whose capabilities ranged from traditional spaceflight to multidimensional existence. The Universal Council had established a permanent embassy in Earth's dimensional space, staffed by beings whose consciousness stretched across eons, but who still found themselves learning new concepts from humans who had achieved their awakening in less than a week. And in the space between dimensions, Elena Vasquez worked with consciousness entities from multiple universes to develop techniques for facilitating awareness development across realities that operated according to entirely different physical laws. Humanity had responded to a declaration of war by accidentally triggering universal consciousness evolution, pioneering multi-level development approaches, and establishing partnerships with entities whose existence transcended normal cosmic frameworks. It was, Elena often thought while facilitating awakening processes for civilizations across 17 galaxies, probably exactly what anyone should have expected from a species that had spent their entire history learning to thrive under impossible circumstances. The universe had declared war on humanity's limitations, and humanity had smiled, evolved beyond the concept of warfare, and offered to teach everyone else how to do the same. In the end, it turned out that the greatest weapon humanity possessed wasn't technology or tactics, or even their talent for innovation under pressure. It was their willingness to say yes to impossible opportunities and then figure out how to make them work. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly what everyone needed it to become.